Do you want to reach your customers better? Then that means doing one simple thing, going all in on video. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. I don't know, I'm camera shy. What would I say? I don't want to be awkward or weird. But here's what I can tell you. If you can get over that awkwardness, if you can get over that discomfort and understand the value of video, then you'll start to realize that there's no other medium right now that allows you to connect with your prospective customer better than video content, where they can see you, they can hear from you, and they can learn to trust that what you're selling is actually what you say it is. Now, if you don't know much about video, you're in luck, because on today's show, we have Dan Bennett on the podcast. We're not only going to talk about the value of video. We're going to talk about the actual things you can be doing to set up your video space so you can start creating video content today. Dan runs an amazing video agency. You should check it out. I'll put the link down in the episode description. But before we dive into this interview, we have a word from one of the incredible businesses that sponsors the podcast. Don't forget, you can also support the podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice. Talk soon. There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more. All right, Dan, it's great to have you on the podcast today. Man, I got to just say, you look good on camera, both for your amazing beard and for your great video quality. Which I guess is a good thing because you do this a little bit for a living. So hello and welcome to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Glad to be here. I always kind of joke it's like portfolio on display. If I show up looking bad, I don't think anyone wants me to help them try and look good.
Bro, there was a time during COVID where, so I do like these, for local business owners, we have this thing called Growth Group where it's about 10 to 15 business owners. We get together and we just talk. There's no selling. It's just like honest conversation about running a business. So we talk sales, all these things. Well, during COVID, I did a digital version of that because, nobody was meeting. And I had this dude, I had people coming to that who weren't local, but wanted to come to a business thing. But I had this guy come who was I think he was like a web developer or something, but he's trying to sell more. And he was in his kitchen. Behind him was the sink, like all the dishes piled up and like an open box of cereal. And he was like, yeah, I don't know. I just can't get anyone to close deals with me. And I was like, I think maybe, might be something there. I don't know.
That's so funny. When I do workshops and stuff, when I use slides, they're all just kind of visual, and I'm not afraid to, tell a pun or a dry joke of some kind or whatever. And I got a whole section where I've named all the different kind of looks that you see on Zoom calls.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. And yeah, I've seen some doozies. Yeah.
Do you have a podcast? You have a great podcast voice.
Yeah, we ran one for a while. I'm working with someone right now who's helped us build team and push forward in a lot of different ways. And they just discovered that I used to have a podcast called The Antipreneur Show. And she's like, why are you not still doing that? I'm like, listen, we're growing a business. It took a lot of time. And plus I did my own editing for that show. So it was easy to kind of shut it off. It was fun though. And it looks like maybe 2025, I might spin it back up now that I'm in a place where I can actually hand off post-production to some other folks.
There's nothing more miserable about podcasting than having to do all of your own editing. As someone who has done that for years, you really you discover what you love, like the topics that you love, and you also discover how much work it takes to produce content like this. So
Yeah, some of my favorite clients are either like podcast houses or individual podcasters who have added video to what they're doing.
mhm.
And a lot of times they're really scared about like, oh, video, it's this big beast I have to tame or whatever. I'm like, oh no, 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 no. You've ran a podcast.
Mhm.
You've done all the hard stuff already. We're just going to turn a camera on now, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not quite that easy, but man, if you've ran a podcast, you've done the full extent of front to back production, and I salute you.
So for our listeners, maybe they're listening on a car trip or what have you, so they can't see you. Dan has an awesome setup currently, so I encourage you guys to check out the video with this. But Dan, I just jumped right into the conversation, and I want to spend more in this conversation. But let's back up a little bit and let's give the people. Let's give the people what they want. They've heard the intro, but I'd like to invite you. Maybe tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, just so we're on the same page.
Yeah, so 100 years ago, I was an engineer and hated it. So that was like my went to school to do thing. And I knew even when I was in school, I didn't want to do it. So that got me through, my early 20s. And I was also in a touring band while that was happening. So I had my creative outlet.
Yeah.
And very accidentally, I didn't even know what the word entrepreneur was back then. I had other bands who saw like and I'll date myself, saw our MySpace, saw our website, saw our merch. And
we call that, that's all the good old days, man. That's what we call that,
I love it. And I'm like, well, I do, because we're not on a label. So, we got to save and make money wherever we can. And that kind of blossomed into doing a lot of design work, apparel printing, all kinds of stuff for other bands. And then the last thing we did was make a CD DVD combo for the young ones out there. We used to put discs in boxes, and we had a video disc in our box. And that was where I got the video bug. I was like, oh, how hard is it to make a narrative music video? And then 4 months later, I was like, that's one of the hardest things I've ever done before. But we pulled it off, and that's where I was like, wow, video is really the medium for me. So I went on a journey that many people in the video world go on, and I did some film and television. I did a lot of like corporate stuff, some government contracting, had a season there. And if you've ever done video, you're going to cringe here a little bit, because you'll know what I'm talking about, where we filmed weddings and tried to tell stories that way. And I went through that journey, and I was like, man, none of this is like, I never wanted to be in Hollywood or shoot films or like be a hired gun. I just wanted to use this medium to tell better stories. And where that was happening the most was in the music industry, where I got my start. So I was helping other people film music videos. I was filming interviews and, getting to meet some of my rock heroes and stuff like that. And that was just a lot more fun. So I kind of took that with me, and I'm like, okay, what's next in my career? Worked for a small production house for a while, and then I struck out on my own in 2014 and was still doing the corporate stuff, still keeping the lights on. And I'm originally from Flint, Michigan. I'm in Dallas, Fort Worth now, but originally in Flint, Michigan, born and raised, in very poverty-stricken city. And I would like fly all over the country and do these big jobs for people like Harley and Camaro, people who did not need more money. And then I would come home, and the people across the hall from me couldn't afford my rates. And I'm like, oh, there's got to be a way to help these people. So essentially, I was moving from behind the camera to in front of it for my own business. And I was realizing very quickly that all of my filmmaking knowledge was making it easy for me to get on camera. And I'm like, I bet I could teach other people this without turning them into filmmakers, just give them the best tools to get from, off camera to on. And 2017, it worked. I helped my first person build their home studio so they could just hit record anytime.
And this is so funny too, because now, 7 years past that, it's such a key pillar of how your business shows up online. So, you got to be patting yourself on the back of like, man, I'm glad I, hitched my wagon to this.
Yeah, I have probably said no less than 500 times in conversations over the last 5-6 years that this is the first time in my career I've ever been ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Ever.
I feel the same way with
close.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I've gotten close to the tail of the curve before, but this is the first time where I was like, oh, I'm in a good spot.
Yeah. In an era where I always bought Bitcoin after all-time high, I am fortunate for once in my life that I started a podcast before everyone else had podcasts. So it is, it's nice to have that rare W of, and whether it's luck or whatever it is. But yeah, you have this awesome and I can tell you're great at it because you're probably the best looking guest I've had on Zoom. Um, Probably ever. And I've done, 6 years of pod. I can think of a couple in my mind who are probably close, but the one thing about like recording on Zoom is, it's Zoom, right?
Yeah.
But your setup looks great. You look great. So I mean, you've obviously, this is a great skill set of yours. So I think it'd be a different story if you were like, yeah, I've committed to this for like 7 years. And because sometimes people, they'll show you like, they're like, yeah, I do X, Y, and Z. And then they show you their work and you're like, ooh, and like, how's it going? So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm getting all over the place here, but so you planted your flag in the sand. You said, hey, you built someone's home studio with them. And take me back to like when you first, well, actually, I'll ask you this. Did you price yourself well, or did you charge too little back then?
I know you already know the answer to this.
Yeah.
Definitely charged too little. And part of it was just inexperience in that exact field. And part of it was the whole transition for me was like, these big corporations don't need more money. Let me use my skill set to help smaller businesses level the playing field so they can look and sound good like the big dogs do. And that first year was a little rough. Yeah.
Mhm.
There was some breaking even going on all over the place for
But
sure.
I'm sure it felt good though to get like that first
Yeah.
like paid invoice of like, oh, this isn't just an idea. Like this, like people will pay me money for this.
Yeah. And that client is an all-time best friend and still a client to this day. She was a total like poster child for my work for the first 3-4 years. And she grew her company and included video in what she offers her clients. She's an image consultant, and they do like brand refreshes, all the digital. They do photography, and they have video on their packages sometimes too. So it's so cool to like help her get her start, and then watch her include video in what she does. And she still hires me, a couple times a year for helping out with her clients. So it is cool, man. And then 2020, it just expedited the process, and a whole bunch of professionals that I knew that were entrepreneurs or solopreneurs or something of that sort were like, hey, I'm still doing what I'm doing, but like I have to do it remotely now because they won't let me in the building. And this looks and sounds terrible.
Mhm.
So I sat around for a couple of days and I was like, okay, can we do this remotely? Is it possible to still set up the gear, set up a background, have people look and sound good? And kicked off my first couple in September of 2020, and it worked. And I'm like, oh man, I think we're in a good spot here. And 95-ish% of the hundreds of clients we've had since are all done remotely. So
Yeah.
it's kind of cool that it worked out that way.
What's funny about that too is something like COVID that forces you to do business a little bit differently. Like doing this, by the way, I don't know if my 2-year-old and 4-year-old are currently screaming at each other. So I think they're having a good day. COVID forced this thing where you had to do it remote. And then suddenly you realize like what I necessarily maybe didn't think was doable before, now I'm realizing makes sense. And a good example of this would be like my wife does or did basically language tutoring. She would teach Spanish and ASL, and she would only do it with people in person. And then she had her first customer online who was like a Zoom call, right? And she was like, that'll never actually work. And then today, that's only the customer she has, because she was like, why was I driving from place to place?
Yeah.
Like I never realized this was possible, I guess. So it's the digital world, right?
It's been a wild ride. My fourth client, after I kind of ramped back up and we figured out we would be able to do it remotely, was in Australia. And that was the final kind of piece where I'm like, yeah, this is totally doable. As long as they have access to like Amazon, I think we're in good shape. So we've been able to service people all over the place, which is so fun. And I love too that it came out of like, oh God, now what do we do? Because my latest product in my business came from a place that makes no sense as well. So I like when those kind of happy accidents happen, because we have enough accidents that are terrible. So some happy ones every once in a while are welcome. So
yeah, and I do appreciate you mentioning that, because I do think as business owners, I think people from the outside think that there comes a point where it becomes so simple and so easy. And I don't know if like the mistakes ever really stop, only that, you become more resilient to it. You're like, I waste a lot of money there, or I made a big mistake there. But
dodging waves, that's what we call it internally. Well, it's just kind of like, I see a problem coming. At least we can get out of the way a little bit.
So I'm curious, like for your setup and like your backdrop, do you ever get bored where you're like, I want to change this up for this year? Or is it pretty Like once it's set, it's like I'm gonna hang on to this one for a while.
Yeah, actually, I love the way you phrase that because that's exactly what it is that I get bored. So it's kind of twofold. Used to be in a tiny, tiny room before moving from Michigan to Texas. And I was able to get like 3 looks out of that room by rotating things and moving things. And no one ever knew I was in this like 12 by 10 room, you know.
Yeah.
Got down here and got some space, but the space is on like a loft or a landing area. A lot of Texas homes have a bonus room or game room, whatever they call
Yeah.
it. And so I'm not in a room. I'm in a space, but not a room. And the only direction I can face, because there's like stairs over there and a couple doors and no flat walls anywhere except behind me, um, kind of forced me into, although I have a lot of space, I can only face one way. So the way that I got around it was to put a cheap table where I'm at now, and then a couple of monitors behind me and a piece of art on the wall. And I would have to like turn around, face the camera, do all this stuff, go back to that desk and work. And then one day, because this desk is just like a butcher block that I bought from Home Depot that I stained and I put it on a couple of file cabinets, and that's always been my desk. I just duplicated the desk, and now the one behind me is just a prop. And so when I get bored, I change the art on the wall and I change the displays behind me and I change the colors that are shining, and I have a new background to keep myself entertained. So I switch it out. I actually switched it out just today because it's been a couple weeks, and had a little fun with it. And that's what I do, for myself. I do work with a ton of people on backgrounds though. So normally
I know mine's real bad. I just
it's one of those things though, like in real life, you walk into a room and you see a well done studio and it looks horrible because it makes no sense in real life because you're placing things for the camera, not for the human eye.
yeah.
And a lot of times change there is difficult because the things that we focus on are like lamps, plants, furniture, artwork, all those sorts of things. And I oftentimes joke that my job sometimes is more like a stager for real estate or like an interior designer as opposed to like studio builder, because most people don't want glowing lights and screens like me. They want it to look like you're sitting with them comfortably in a room or an office or something like that. And so then change is a little bit more difficult because it's like, do I want to move a couch? Does that bookshelf have to go? Am I just going to rotate my whole setup so I can use a different wall? Yeah, so it can be tough. Yeah.
What when you first started like getting deeper into this, would you call yourself like self-taught? And if so, yeah, YouTube, I mean, mentor, like what was your process for getting so good at this?
Um, I hope this doesn't upset anyone. Yeah, because I didn't go to school for film or any of that kind of stuff. I literally said, we're doing this final hurrah, and there's going to be a DVD in this package. So let's take a camera to the studio and let's make a music video. Very much because I was a designer and I'd done hard things before, including touring in a band, like very much was like, this shouldn't be that bad. And as obstacles came, I'm like, wow, we got to get really creative in how we solve this. We actually had professional actors. We had them coming from all over the Midwest for food and lodging, and we didn't pay anyone. And it was very upfront. So I had to get super creative of how to get people who already had IMDb pages to like come and be part of something. And it really was like trial by fire. And then coming out of the other end of that, because it's a good product that I'm still kind of proud of to this day, I was like, okay, that could have been planned way better. I could have had more people on my team. We could have spent more time on the edit. Like I saw pretty quickly that things were possible. And then the next job that I had in my career was working for a small production house. So I went in, excuse me, as a graphic designer, illustrator, and we would take a lot of my artwork and then animate it and put that in videos. So I was like able to do my job while I also went on set, ran cameras, did a little editing, and kind of, continued the learning process without that being my job, quote unquote. So it really was just diving the deep end, thinking like it's only 5 foot deep and then it's 12. And I was like, oh man. And I spent the next like year and a half, 2 years, like doggy paddling down to the shallow end so I could stand up.
Yeah. And I've what's the, oh man, what's that concept called? Like the more you learn something, the more you realize what you don't know about it. There's like still so much more to learn about it. So I imagine it's a little bit of that as well. But moving the conversation forward a little bit, I know we've chatted a lot about you. I'd love, I'm sure we have people listening who they're getting into video content, wherever they are in their brands. They're thinking, you know what? I realize how valuable video is. And if any of our listeners are on LinkedIn, they probably have noticed how much LinkedIn has been pushing video content. And even it's always so funny to me, by the way, like the weird trends that happen where like LinkedIn pushes this vertical video update. And then you have like everyone, they're like, it's like they work for LinkedIn who's like, I need to tell you all about vertical video. And it's like, okay, I get the concept. But anyway, so people have probably seen these conversations about video. And I think even people, I think people have realized, okay, there's an element of untapped potential for my brand related to video. I'd love to start to pick your brain on the importance of video. I think a lot of us are very skittish when it comes to video content. And this is not to be the obnoxious interviewer who just like throws 8 questions at you and then is like, all right, what's your answer? But let's just start with video in general. We mentioned you were fortunate to, you have this skill set in a very high need area. Talk to me a little bit about the value of video and connecting with your buyer and kind of how you've seen that play out with some of your customers.
For sure. I will warn people now that when I get questions like, how long should a video be? I have answers like, well, if it's good, it doesn't matter. Or if people say better done than perfect or polish and publish, I say yes. And then it's a spectrum and we got to find where you belong in the middle.
But here's the deal. I love that you said that though, because, I've said this a lot on my podcast about understanding nuance and how I think this is a little bit of something that's trained on social media because social media is so like, what side are you on, I guess? And like, here's my take and it's either this or it's that. And one thing that I've talked a lot about on the show is nuance and like this gray area. So a good example of this is, you got to niche down, great concept, but there's also, I've had customers and friends who've run businesses where they don't have a niche at all. They're just really good at what they do. So not leaning so heavily into it's got to be this or that. I love that you've sort of pointed out that nuance.
Yeah, because it exists. And because I help people who are, entrepreneurs, professionals, and creators of some sort too. Every time someone's like, well, what's your ideal avatar? I'm like, yeah, we're not having that conversation. But I'm also hyper aware that I don't sell toilet paper and everyone needs it, right? So I still have to find my middle ground, but I service so many different kinds of people that it keeps this sort of conversation fresh and in front of me all the time, which I love. So when I think about like, things like trends and what's happening on LinkedIn, LinkedIn's like my jam. So LinkedIn and YouTube are where I am having most success and having lots of great conversations and getting my leads and all that kind of stuff. So when I think about that, I start with that whole, like, I'm going to tell you something that's counterproductive, but also know that there's nuance beyond it. So I love that you love it because it's kind of my world. And a quick example, I just saw this like 3 weeks ago. So as a hobby, I like to golf. I got like a mat in the garage and I hit into a net and it's a nice release for me. And I used to play a ton in my 20s. So I kind of revived this little bit of a hobby. And, of course, now we're in a brand new era. So I'm seeing all kinds of TikToks and people, this is how you swing better and all this crap. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then I saw someone and they were making a piece of footage and they happened to be near Tiger Woods, who was on a driving range. And they're like, hey, Tiger, what do you have to say to golfers nowadays? Blah, 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 whatever. And he just turned to the camera and he's like, stop effing watching YouTube. And then he turned back and kept hitting balls. And that was so fantastic because I'm like, oh, people who want to make video already are. Stop watching what people say about video, knowing I'm also in that category, so I got to be safe. But I really do mean it because what ends up working for people is different from each other. So I focus on the things that make video great. And that's what I teach people. Without going fully into it, you see like the, planets behind me and all that stuff. I have a solar system methodology, which is just hub and spoke. And it's a way to help people with strategy and know what videos they're making, why they're making them, and where they're going to live once they're done making them. And the planets around your big idea or your sun are topics, themes, buckets. It's the stuff that you talk about and that you specialize in. And mine are very specific in their storytelling, which is the crux of everything we do here. Camera presence and strategy, because that's where everyone drops the ball. Everyone teaches about like the latest camera gear and how to grow your YouTube channel fast and AI and video, but they don't tell you, okay, great. Now, how do I make great videos? And it's totally about having a great strategy, being great on camera, and telling great stories. So there is nuance within the generality always, but I do like to tell people like being counterintuitive is often your best friend, because if you chase a trend, it might work at 10%, but if you bore down and do the hard thing 6 months later, you might be 5 times as far ahead because you did your thing your way and really focused on the quality of it. So I navigate that line often between, better done than perfect or polish and publish.
I think a lot of people, they want to make video a core piece of their brand, but I think it's that newbie era where, like, I go back and look at some of my video content, man. I've been doing this for 6 years. And you know how Facebook, everything I post on LinkedIn gets cross-posted, like copy pasted, posted on Facebook. So Facebook has this thing where it says like, remember, 5 years ago today. And I had this video pop up that was, it was just abysmal. Camera was like facing up, like into the nostrils. You could see that it was like facing the ceiling. The fan was spinning, like background was just, I was like, what is happening? Was I high? Like, what was happening?
Yeah.
But point being, I look at that process as, if I had been smarter and wiser, I probably would have just hired someone like you just to hey, save me the pain, man. Save me the pain of like the next 3 or 4 years. Right. But what I've noticed is a lot of people, they don't want to necessarily jump into it because they don't want to be the new guy or the new person who it's awkward or weird or what have you. Again, caveat being for our listeners, just hire Dan. Just hire Dan. It's going to be easier that way. It's going to save you time. You'll skip all the pain points. But what encouragement do you have for the entrepreneur who's like, man, I want to do video, but I don't want to be the awkward new kid or to look off or, to actually, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I got 100 things to say, but to try and keep it concise, there's a slide that's towards the end of when I do workshops that are called The Real Power of Video. And one of the first slides is like, I'm going to tell you the secret up front. The power of video is not video at all. And people just look at me sideways. I'm like, hold on, I'll explain. And then towards the end, I reveal like what a majority of my work is. And I kind of joke because I say it's the last remnant of my engineering career from 100 years ago. I just got a pie chart and it's very literal. And it's of the last 15 years of my professional career. And it's cut into 4 pieces. 3 pieces are 5% each, and they're little slices. And then there's one big chunk afterwards. So the work that we do and we help other people do literally fit in this 4-piece pie. The first 5% is technical. So it's like the equipment, the software, if you edit your own stuff, some of those sorts of things that are more on the technical side. The second 5% is strategy. And even though it's a huge part of the work we do and a huge part of what helps someone become consistent and then get the ROI of video, it's actually only 5% of the effort you have to give, which is good news. The third 5% is distribution. Where's it going to go? What's it going to do for us? Are we playing by the rules of that platform to get the most out of the video? All that kind of stuff. And then I blow it up as big as I can on the slide and I go to my last slide and I'm like 85% of the work that I do. And I kind of look at everyone like, are you guessing? Are you wondering? Do you know what it is? And I go one more slide and it's very, very true. 85% of the work I do is convincing entrepreneurs to give themselves permission to be great on camera, because they're always already phenomenal human beings in a lot of categories. And this last one is not different. If you can crush it in a boardroom, if you can crush it at a coffee, if you can crush it on a Zoom sales call, wherever you're comfortable and you do well, you can be a B minus on video, no problem at all. And I swear you've done harder things in your career or running your business than being on camera. So it's never to say like get over it, but it is to say that there's a way to get there. And then usually the final little turn of the key that unlocks video for most people, especially entrepreneurs and people who are in professional fields, is that you've got verticals, you've got systems in your business already, and they're never perfect. They're always evolving. But once you kind of get them, propped up and working, it's like, ooh, that became easier. And then, ooh, we hired a couple of people. And like, that's actually one of our best, verticals because it works so well for us. Although video is creative, and a lot of times we're sharing our creativity and our knowledge and expertise, it is just another vertical. And if you can look at it as a system that you just have to run and get better at, like all your other ones, including bookkeeping and other things, you really can kind of get the flywheel spinning on that. And I just used a lot of business analogy, so I apologize.
No, people are used to me throwing random terms out. So I do like how you marry. There's a great concept there, I think, about a lot of times as creatives, or not even just as creatives, as entrepreneurs, many of us have a story of like, yeah, my corporate world, and like now I'm doing this thing, and I think sometimes there's value in realizing, you pointed out like the system side of it. You know, doing video content is like an inspiration of creativity, but also pairing that with the strategy side of it. Like we're being intentional here. There's a business thought here. I think that's where there's like a real magic and like a secret sauce.
Yeah, it's crazy to watch the light bulbs go off and then watch some people get some ROI and then watch them have like a face palm moment where they're like, dude, I did this. Why did I not do this like 4 years ago? Because again, they're already awesome. And it doesn't mean they're awesome at like presenting or acting or whatever might come across on screen well. It just means they know their stuff.
Mhm.
And I don't think I've really ever I've had some bad clients in terms of business, but I've never had any that like were so terrible at what they did. I'm like, there's no reason to record this because you don't even know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Everyone has always been like really good at what they do. And if you can, I'm always saying internally, we call it the medicine and the cheese. The vet says, get your dog to take this pill. Dog won't take the pill. Shove it in some cheese. Hey, Fido's going to make it. So like we do this all the time in our work where we're tricking entrepreneurs and professionals into telling better stories, into being better producers of their own work. Because if we say, hey, pre-production, script, right off the bat, they're like, oh God, I'm making a movie. This sounds terrible. But if we trick them into doing these things over time, they just do them because it's best practices and then they end up with a great result. And so I'm always looking at ways that I can and I warn everyone it's going to happen, but I still do everything I can to trick them into giving themselves permission to be great on camera because most of the time they think it's something they've seen, whether it's a newscaster, a documentarian, a movie, an actor, whatever. And really what it is what someone would see on camera if they pointed a camera at you and you didn't know they were there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole game. So if we can help people get there, and again, I'm only looking for 80%, like a B- of what you're like in real life. If we can hit that, we're gonna.
Yeah, I'm definitely like a solid C. So, but I show up consistently, which is also a big part of the game.
The biggest lever you can pull.
Well, and actually, it brings me to my next question, which I know we're coming towards the end of our time. By the way, I love guests like you where we're like into the conversation, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like we've already blown through our time. But this has been really fun. This concept of consistency, I think a lot of times now, naturally, your best customers are probably ones who are like, yep, I get it. And this is I'm building something long term. I'm building a brand long term. Video is going to be like a new cornerstone piece of my brand. But we've all had bad customers, and rather, we've all had uninformed customers where someone comes to you and they say, you know what, I want to do video content. Hey, I posted the one video. Why am I not a millionaire? What happened? So how do you typically maybe combat's not the right word, but how do you guide people into the right understanding of video in terms of like ROI and the time it takes to see that ROI?
Yeah, I'm a metaphor and analogy guy. I used to think it was a deficit years ago because it's the only way I know how to learn or teach. Now I realize storytelling is the best tool in the world. So like I do well by it. But when I think about those sorts of things and like kind of preconceived notions and stuff around video, I have a story for everything. And I kind of view it, this is a little violent, so I probably need a new analogy, but I kind of view it like the Old West shows where they had individual bullets in the little holes around their belt and they could just pull a bullet if they needed one. And kind of using my stories as like, oh, I see what you're doing in there, and just put one in, bang, and hit the target, So I got a story for everything. And one of them, is along the lines of, I get comments every week on my YouTube videos where people say things like, man, this is such great timing. I needed this information. Thank you so much. And it is a 2-year-old video.
Yeah.
And there's not another place on the internet that I know of where you can create something, it can compound over time, and it can be brand new to someone 24 months after you made it. So that's one thing about the long tail and kind of compounding over time that I like to talk about. And another is like on sales calls, I'll talk about like, what does viral mean to you? And I very purposely ask like this list of questions throughout my conversations. And you get a myriad of answers, and they're generally around like, I don't know, 100,000 views, or I don't know, when, your video does this, or when it's on Reddit or something, like they all have their own version. I'm like, cool, I'm going to tell you our version. I'm going to tell you, I can guarantee virality, but if our definition doesn't align with what you're after, do not hire us. And essentially my definition of virality is outperforming your baseline. So if we make better video, we got you looking better, sounding better, performing better, having a better strategy, whatever form, it's taken for you. And we can outperform your baseline. That means that either humans are interacting and sharing this with other people because they find it valuable and they think it might be worth sharing, or the algorithm is showing it to people and they're sticking around for a lot of it. And then the algorithm's like, ooh, here's another person like person A. Hey, person B, do you like this? Ooh, they liked it too. I think we might have found an audience. Either way, whether it's an algorithm or a human, you've outperformed your baseline. And that's the only thing that we can guarantee in all of our work, is that we can help you outperform your baseline. And that's what viral is to us. So a lot of times, not only is that counter to what they think virality is, they also have a light bulb go off like, oh, ooh, never heard anyone put it that way. Yeah. And then I'm kind of like, yeah. And if we constantly outperform your baseline, what'll happen after like a year or two? I'm just saying, so I just have a story ready for everything that we've come up against in the last, 15 years.
Well, as we come to the end of our conversation, for people listening they're thinking, okay, hang on, I need to connect with this guy. I mean, for our listeners, you just need to hire this guy. But people who at least want to follow your content and start to engage with you more, what's like your best avenue for that? Where do you want to send people?
So I bought a URL years ago because I ran a podcast to get good at being a guest on podcasts, because I really wanted to be on a lot more podcasts. And so I bought a URL called danhaslinks.com. And it's just a link stack of everywhere where you can find me online. One of those buttons in that stack is a free strategy call. And I think you'll appreciate this, especially since I've heard some of your episodes now and how you think about business and sales and all those things. I don't do any sales calls. We do for like our editing subscription, product or whatever, because people have a lot of questions and we got to go through that process. But for most of the work I don't do any sales calls. I do strategy calls. I help people solve a problem real quick, get them unstuck, everything from tech to just camera presence to where do I start, whatever the case may be. No pressure, no gimmicks, no sales, just strategy. And one of two things always happens. One, they're like, oh, I can tell what it's like to work with this guy. I think I might want to move forward. Or two, the next time they bump into someone, or like you so kindly done live on this show, you should probably just hire this guy. And it's not that I'm the best or am awesome. It's that if you care about coming out of the gate looking like you got a year's worth of experience under your belt, that's where we can help people. So yeah, just a conversation, help people get unstuck, and once they stick around.
It's easy referral to make, because like I said, just seeing your video, I'm like, okay, yeah. Well, and I've also, when you're in business long enough, you can glean pretty quickly how much experience someone has. So like, you obviously have deep experience. And then for our listeners, if you're not seeing the video, I can literally see the product of your work. So that's why it's easy to make that recommendation. I've also, and now I'm being long-winded, I've also, which by the way, doesn't imply you were long-winded now that I say that. I've just learned more and more the value of speed in business. And I mean, are you really going to try to teach this yourself, or are you just going to hire the guy who knows how to do it? Right.
Dude, I keep saying the more gray that comes into my beard, the more I say like speed is sexy. The older I get, things going smoothly, halfway according to plan and fast. Oh, that's what gets me up in the morning. So I love it.
Well, Dan, it was so good having you on the podcast today. I'm going to put the link to Dan Has Links in the episode description for our listeners. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, no problem at all. Everywhere on the internet, I'm highly approachable, and I'm just a low-key guy. So no wacky stuff, no internet guru stuff, just hanging out and helping people look and sound good.
Love it. Thanks, man. Hey, for our listeners, if you're a first-time listener to the podcast, what the heck you waiting on? Click that subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. And don't forget, you can also support the podcast on our Patreon, patreon.com/goodadvice, for as little as the price of a cup of coffee. I would call it 2018 price of coffee. It's $5 a month. Or if you want to advertise your business on the podcast, you can always reach out, blake@goodadvicecoaching.com. Thank you to those of you who supported the podcast long-term. That's today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.